Well, I know we've had a bit of rain today, but things are starting to dry out, and we're promised a couple of warm days. So, welcome to another episode of Jim's Allotment Garden. Okay, so I had a question last week from Dead Poet, and asking about the chicken manure. Now I've just cleaned these chickens out, as you can see. They've all just had fresh straw, and I've got out from there about 4 of these barrows full of chicken manure, this is I think it's a 120 litre wheelbarrow, so 4 of those have gone onto the okay, so there's the chicken manure that I fetched. As I say, there's 4 wheelbarrows full there, and I'm digging that into the ground, so all of that will basically be dug into this area here, and this area is probably about 4 metres across by 4 metres, so 16 square metres. And basically what I'll be digging into here is 4 barrows of chicken manure straight out the chickens, and there's also 4 barrows of these sort of well rotted wood chippings. Now basically what I'll do is dig a row there, and then I'll put in about half a wheelbarrow of the wood chippings like this, and I just put that all in the bottom of the ground. And then on top of that I'll put probably about the same of the fresh chicken manure. Then obviously this stuff is quite, obviously, you know, there is some goodness in there, shall we call it, but it is sort of mainly straw, but as you can see, bits of it are quite dense with the manure. And then I'll spread this along these wood chippings across the row like that. As I say, these are well rotted. This tree was cut down the back end of last year, so it's had all winter rotting. And I'll put in probably half a barrow of sort of chicken manure along there. Then basically what I'm doing is digging the ground on top of that. So basically that all gets buried underneath the ground. I'm also putting some coffee in there as well, just to add a bit more nitrogen so it breaks down. And then I shall leave this like this. I'm only rough digging it. I'll leave this then for probably about a month or so till we put the potatoes in. Then as soon as this spinach here comes out, I'll obviously do something similar along there. So I'll rotivate all of this, and then this will obviously be where the potatoes are going. Okay, so just to give you an idea, I've just dug about 5 foot in there, so that's how big the pile is now. So as you can see, I've probably used about half of it already, and I've dug it like this so you can actually see. I always dig it kind of sideways, but you can see the ground there, and then a layer of the chippings in the muck, and then the ground on top. And so basically I'll do that, and then when the rotivator comes along in a couple of months' time, it'll mix all of this in with the ground. Okay, so the comfrey that we planted a couple of weeks ago, it's starting to come up now. As you can see, I don't think it's had too much trouble sort of getting in. Obviously, it needs to put its roots down, but it is starting to come through. So just a quick note: in addition to the comfrey that I put in the other day, a friend of mine that's got an allotment just over the way. You can actually just about see him over there, Doug. You can see, where is he? There he is, look. He's very kindly given me some more comfrey. So this is actually, I think, a different variety to the one I've got. So what I've done is I've just planted it in here. I've actually noticed there's a top of a beer bottle in there. So I'll get rid of that. But I've just put that in there. I haven't gone to the lengths that I've done with the other, because this is obviously, I've got the path here, so I'm, you know, it's not likely to spread. But just a quick note that I've planted it in there amongst the hollyhocks, and there's some mint in here as well. And I've transplanted all of the chives that were here round to where the others are. So I've got a couple of rows of chives now. So that's a bit more comfy for the comforty later in the season. So as I've just explained, these are the chives that I planted last year, which are starting to come up. And these ones are a slightly different variety, but they're the ones that I've just moved from where the comfy's gone in. So what I'm going to be doing is the annual herbs that you saw me planting the other day, they're going to be going sort of down here and down here. Then I'll just use the rest of this for the carrots. So basically, I'm going to use around a third of the carrot bed, if you like, that I normally use for carrots for herbs right now. Because to be honest with you, carrots are quite cheap to buy anyway, but we're more likely to use herbs than we are carrots. And obviously herbs are cash crop, because if you try and buy these from the shops, they are really expensive. And you know, we tend to use a lot more herbs anyway. So to put them into the allotment, I'm obviously going to use this bit of ground here. Now, apart from the chives, there'll only be annual herbs here. So as you've seen, I'm going to put basil, marjoram and thyme in here, and I'll put like a little row, probably half of a row for each one. And then in the end, I'm also going to grow some coriander, because that's one of the herbs that I use quite a lot. So kind of this quarter here will eventually be herbs. The rest will obviously be carrots later on in the year. Okay, so this is one of the pallets that I managed to get hold of last week, and I'm just taking it apart so I can make the staging for inside the green now. So just as I quickly explain, to take a pallet apart, you need a chisel, something like this. As you can see, it's quite narrow. It's only about maybe a centimetre thick. But basically what you want to do is start at one end of the pallet and drive the chisel in just this side of the nails, so you can start to lever off. Now always start at one end, don't start in the middle. And I'm just going to drive it in between the two pieces of wood, like that. And then by levering slowly, what you can do is you can lift the piece of wood off. Like that. And then as soon as you've got one off, you can then go to the next. Like that. And take your time to do this, because obviously if you do try to rush it and put too much force on the wood, what you will do is split the wood, and then obviously it's no good for you. And then when you get to the last one, basically just put your chisel in like that. And there's your piece of wood off. Now, potentially you will get, this was actually split before I started taking it off, but what you might get is some splitting at the end, and obviously you can just cut that piece off there, but the rest of it will be perfectly good for you. And, I'll just continue taking the rest of this apart on the other one, and then I'll show you what I've made from it. And there you go. So I've made some staging, and these strips underneath here and at the back there, they'll stop it from sort of moving about within the frame for the border. And basically I've sort of overhanged it a few inches here as well, so about 3 inches. Now I'll be able to put all of my trays, pots and everything else as they're growing there. I'm also going to make another load to go all the way over to there. And then during the summer, when obviously I'm growing the tomatoes and cucumbers etc. in here, these are actually going to be used outside as like small temporary fence panels to go between the potatoes and the path, so that when the potato tops grow high, they don't fall over onto the path, and you know, it just ties it up. So I'll probably need to make another 6 or possibly another 5 in total to go from there all the way to here. And then I'll be doing something very similar to do this side here. So basically all the pots and everything like that now can go on here, and obviously I've put a gap. If you remember the episode where I made this surface very early on in the year, I think it was in January, I've made it in exactly the same way. Basically I've just put a piece of wood in between to space them by about well, just a bit less than half an inch or so. In fact, it's exactly the same piece of wood that I used, to be honest. And I've screwed these together rather than nailed them, because you know, they will sort of rattle apart if you don't put screws through. And all I've done is at the edges I've put 2 screws to keep it square so it doesn't kind of scissor, and all the others have just got 1 screw in. What I will do when I get 5 minutes, which may be later on in the year, is I'll just get the sander and just sand off the rough edges around the peripheral, and then I'll paint it with some fence paint. But basically that's why I got all of the pallets to make these, and I'll be making these, as I say, to go all the way along here and all the way along here. Then in the summer they'll be going down whilst there's stuff in these borders here. These will be down the side, outside, out the way. So it's kind of a double function, if you like. So, you know, obviously during the spring, whilst I'm doing the seeds, it'll be like that. Then I can just quickly lift that up and put that outside when I need it. Okay, so Mother Nature part 15, and this is all about propagation. Now, there's quite a lot with propagating of plants. There's quite a few techniques, particularly when it comes to the cuttings and stuff like that. So what I will be doing is in future episodes I'll be going into a bit more depth of how to do it in sort of more detail, and actually practically show you some examples. But today what I want to do is just do an introduction of all about propagation, and obviously how how you can do this in your own garden. Now, propagation's all about multiplying plants. It's how plants spread about, and it's how we grow new plants, etc., and all the rest of it. So there's a few ways of sort of propagating plants. Basically, the first way is obviously by seed, which is the most natural way, and all plants produce seed, and then that seed can then be planted and sort of grown on. And there's various things that we need to discuss about seed, so that'll be coming up in a later episode. There's also layering, which is where you get a branch or a shoot off a plant, and then you put that into the ground, and where it touches the ground it will then root, and then basically you can cut the shoot off, then you've got a new plant. So that's layering, and there's various ways of doing that. And there are other ways of propagating plants, things like cuttings, and also sort of separating. If you've got any rhizomes or bulbs or anything like that, they'll typically multiply, and you can separate the bulbs and do it that way as well. But and there are other ways of doing things. But what I want to do today is just focus on a quick introduction with regards to taking cuttings, seeds, and also layering, and I'll come on to more detail in future episodes on the rest. So seeds are the first thing I really want to talk about. Now, seeds are most certainly the easiest way, or one of the easiest ways to grow plants, and obviously you can buy seeds quite readily in all sort of garden shops and etc. And sort of collecting your seeds are quite easy as well. I mean, basically on any plant you'll get a flower, and then as soon as the flower has been pollinated, basically behind the flower, that flower will then turn into either some kind of berry or bud or seed pod or whatever else, and within there will be contain the seeds. Now, collecting seeds, really, you need to be doing it sort of in the autumn months of the year, exactly like I showed you last autumn, how I went around collecting a few different types of seeds. And over the winter, what you want to do is well, first of all, what you want to do is collect the seeds, put them in a tray, and then dry them out. One of your worst enemies when you're collecting seed is moisture, because what you can do is get mould and sort of mildew forming on the seeds, and obviously this is a bad thing. As soon as you've actually dried the seeds out, what you want to do is keep them in a cool, dry environment, and ideally dark as well. because that will most certainly, you know, stop them from sort of either prematurely germinating, which is obviously what you don't want, and also it'll stop any mould or fungus sort of forming on them. As soon as you've obviously collected and you preserved your seeds, and I'm talking in sort of general terms now, over the winter you'll sort of overwinter them. Some seeds you need to let them freeze, because inside some seeds there's like a little part which basically needs to freeze before it'll germinate again. So with seeds there's sort of mechanisms within them to stop them from germinating early. Obviously, you know, sort of as things have developed in nature, they've you know, they form this ability to know when the right time to germinate is, you know, when the weather starts to improve, etc. And typically, you know, it's things like moisture, light and heat which will start the seeds to germinate. But with some seeds you do necessarily, you need to let the seed freeze so that the seed will actually start to, you know, it has to go through like a winter season, if you like, before it'll actually grow. So as soon as you've sort of dried your seeds and you've preserved them over the winter, obviously in the spring you want to grow them. And I always use a rule of thumb that the smaller a seed, the shallower you need to grow it, you know, sort of plant it. Now, most seeds, you know, are sort of quite small, you know, they're only 1 millimetre or so across. And any seeds like this, I would always tend to put them no more than sort of 5 millimetres below the soil. Larger seeds, things like runner beans and broad beans, you know, sort of seeds that are kind of the size of your thumb. Those are the seeds you want to put like 2 or 3 inches down in the ground. The bigger the seed, the deeper you go, basically, as a rule of thumb. That's not always the case. Now with seeds, this is how you get variations in plants. If you have a plant with in your garden that you particularly like, and you take the seeds from there, the plants that you grow from them seeds aren't necessarily going to be the same as the plant that you took them from. A classical case of this is I used to grow a lot of lupins, and when I first planted the seed from a seed, you know, a packet of seed, I grew lupins there. They grow sort of over 2 years. The second year they all flowered, and I'd got pinks, yellows, you know, all different colours, whites, and then at the end of that year they ran to seed, and I collected the seed from those and planted them. Now the original plants then flowered again the following year, and they were of course still the same colour. We've got the yellow, the pinks, the greens, etc. All of the seeds, every single plant that I grew from the seeds from all of these plants, all turned out to be purple, because that's the natural colour of the so they'd all reverted back to their sort of natural form. Now there is on seed packets, you may well have seen F1 written on the seed packets, and this is basically these are basically seeds that have been collected from plants, and the seed growers have grown plants for, you know, for a number of years, and they've made sure that these seeds have been collected in a or sort of pollinated and sort of grown in a very controlled environment. And with an F1 seed, you can almost guarantee that every plant that you get from those seeds will be identical. And basically F1 is one stands for the first version, and the second one is filial, which is basically, it's the first true breed of, you know, of those seeds himself. And these are, you know, if you sort of grow 50 of these seeds, every single plant will be identical. So they're grown in sort of identical. They're grown in such a condition that they can't cross-pollinate with anything similar to them, and so all of the seeds that come out will be identical. You know, there's no cross-pollination and stuff like that. Now, if you remember from last year, I actually saved the pumpkin seeds from the year before. And when I planted them out, they all grew like pumpkins and all the rest of it, and I put them out in the garden. And it wasn't until those plants started to fruit that I realised I'd actually got cross-pollinating between courgettes and pumpkins, because obviously they're a similar plant. And so the seeds that I'd collected from the pumpkin, even though I'd taken the seeds out of the pumpkin, the actual plants that I ended up with were kind of, I called them courgettes, I think, where they were actually a cross between a courgette and a pumpkin. So the seeds that you get won't necessarily be, as I say, the same as the parent plant, unless you've grown them in a controlled environment. Unless you've got them inside a greenhouse, which is sort of airtight, you ain't going to happen. So if you collect seed from, you know, the environment, you know, your gardens and stuff like that, don't always expect what you're going to end up with the seed is going to be the same as the as the parent plant that you took it from. Now that's from seed. If you're taking if you're making new plants from either layering or cutting, you'll most certainly end up with a plant which is identical to the plant you take the cutting or the layering off. So if you want a plant to be identical to its parent plant, or the mother plant, by taking cuttings and by taking sort of layering and all the rest of it, which is the same kind of thing, these will most certainly be an identical plant. So if you want a plant which is true to its parent, don't do it by seed, do it by taking cutting or stuff like that. And by taking cuttings, what you can end up with, to be honest with you, I've always found that taking cuttings off plants, if it's that kind of plant that you're growing, they're always they're always stronger than they would be if you were growing it from seed. Now obviously if you're growing annual plants, obviously you've got to grow them from seed. You can't take a cutting from an annual plant. So really the cuttings and the layering is always done with perennial plants. So what is layering? Basically what this is when you, as I've said, you get a branch or a shoot from a plant, and then basically you get the shoot or part of the shoot into the ground, and you can do this quite simply just by pinning it onto the ground with some like loops of wire or whatever. And where that shoot touches the ground, it will then by its own nature throw out roots, and then you can cut that off. Strawberries are a really good example of this. If you get the shoots coming out, put them in the ground, then it's not exactly layering. But you see it a lot with sort of trees and bushes and stuff like that, where the branches have gone down and they'll sort of root. So the first type of layering is basically simple layering, and that's basically just where you get a branch, you sort of bend it down to the ground and bury part of it, pin it down with some wire, and that'll actually root. Now you can do this with a number of sort of bushes and trees and stuff like that. Most certainly you can do it with things like hydrangeas. You can put a branch in the ground, pin that down, and then that will basically root, and then you can cut it off from the parent plant and you've got a new plant. The next type of layering is tip layering, and that's basically as it says in the title. Basically you get a branch and just put the tip of the branch into the ground, and where it'll form a root ball at the tip and then grow back up into a separate plant. So that's tip layering. The next one is natural layering, and this is most certainly how strawberries do it. They'll send out a runner, and then on the end of the runner there'll be a little baby plant, and that'll sort of, where that touches the ground, it'll root, and then that'll send out another runner. And there's a lot of plants that do that. Periwinkle's one that does that. The greater periwinkle, or I can't remember the official name for that. And the sort of things like strawberries and stuff like that, they will spread along the ground by doing that, and they'll very quickly fill a whole area. A lot of herbaceous plants will do that as well. Although many of them will do it actually by the roots, like mint and stuff like that. But I have known mint to go over and actually root as well, doing it by either tip or simple layering. The final one, which is obviously doesn't happen in the wild at all, is air layering. And basically what this is you get a tree or a bush. For example, we've got this tree here, and if you put a bag around one of the stalks, and put some soil or some compost in there, and bind that on with the bag to the plant, and obviously keep that wet, what you'll actually do is get roots forming on the branch, and then you can cut the branch off at the bottom, and you've basically got a new tree, if you like. So that's another method of doing it. So that's in a nutshell, that's layering. As I say, I will come on in more detail with this. The next one, the final one I'll be talking about today is cuttings. Now, I've always been really lucky with cuttings. I mean, there's some, there's a cutting here of these cuttings here are of hydrangeas, and I put in 5 cuttings there, and everyone struck. And I've always been really lucky with cuttings. I don't know why. When I was younger, I used to take hundreds of fuchsia cuttings every year, and pretty much everyone used to strike. From that striking meanings it actually puts out roots and grows into a plant. And basically the trick with cuttings is basically, the first one is you need to prepare the actual cutting itself. And it depends on what type of plant you're actually taking cuttings from. If you're taking cuttings from like hydrangeas or fuchsias or anything like that, or roses, etc., what you need to do is cut the stem at an angle and then take off the leaves, all but a few at the top, and then plant that down the side of a plant pot. And the plant pot needs to be filled with a really well draining compost. So I typically use something like 50% sand, 50% sort of compost, and it doesn't necessarily need to be particularly good compost. And then always plant them down the side of the pot, because that's the part that won't get too waterlogged. You always find if you plant them down the side you get more success. If you were growing like the rosemary, again I've put it down the side, but obviously you pull the branches off slightly differently than you would do with perhaps another shrub. So you know, sort of dependent on the plant, you take different types of cuttings. The really important thing with cuttings is hygiene, because obviously you've got a cutting off a plant, and you need to make sure that all of the plant is clean, the water that you're using is clean, and the soil that you've used in there to put the cuttings in are clean. Cuttings are really prone to things like fungus and mould and stuff like that, so you need to be really careful. So hygiene is quite important when you're taking cuttings, which really is a real trick. Now, from the cuttings, really, you've got nodal cuttings, which is what you do for a fuchsia, for example, or things like laurel bushes and stuff like that, which is something I've done quite a lot of. And that's where you have a branch and you have two leaves coming out. You cut the plant off there, and then cut the two leaves off with a razor blade, and that's where the roots are going to come from. That's a nodal cutting. Then you get like softwood cuttings, which is basically this year's growth. So in this kind of time of year, what you'll do is you'll take the new shoot, which is obviously quite sort of growing quite quickly, and you'll take that shoot and use that as a cutting. Or you can have hardwood cuttings, which you take in the back end of the year. These were hardwood cuttings. Obviously I took these at the back end of last year. And there's various sort of differences that you need to do whilst you're taking those cuttings, and I'll come onto that in the future. The next way of doing cuttings, believe it or not, is root cuttings. Like I was talking about the comfrey, all you need is just a piece of root. So if you cut a piece of root off and just plant that piece of root, that will grow into another plant. And obviously you've got leaf cuttings, where you can take plants that typically have large leaves. What you can do is cut off a section of leaf and plant that, and that leaf will actually grow and into a plant. And I'll show you an example of that as well later in the season. There's obviously another way of doing rooting cuttings, and that's just by basically taking a branch or something off a tree and putting it into a jam jar with water, or some kind of container with water, and just leave them in the water. And what they will do is actually throw roots out into the water, and then as soon as you've got the roots, you can then plant that into a pot. So that's obviously another way of taking cuttings. Typically when I take cuttings, particularly for plants that don't take cuttings particularly well, I'll always water them in, not too much water, but put some water in there. Put the cuttings around the edge, and then I'll cover the whole thing with a bag, just to sort of keep the moisture in there, but obviously you don't want too much moisture. To improve your success rate even more, what you can do is use what's called hormone powder or rooting powder, and this is readily bought at any garden centre, and you just dip the bit that you've cut on the end into the hormone powder, and that will encourage the cutting to send out roots. And obviously, your soil needs to be well drained. In the pot that you use, you don't want to use a particularly large pot. Obviously this one here, I've got 5 cuttings in there, so I use quite a large pot. But what you can do, really, is you're much better off taking cuttings and put them in separate, sort of smaller pots, because you don't need much moisture for them. Put them into smaller pots and put them, sort of 2 or 3 around the edge, and that's much better than having a large one with sort of 6 or 7 in there. Really, 5, I was pushing the boat out there. But that's a really quick explanation about sort of how to propagate plants. So just a quick look at the seeds that we put in last week. Obviously nothing's happened with the herbs as of yet. They can take a couple of weeks to germinate or so, but The broccoli has started to come up, and so what I'll be doing is, as soon as they get a little bit high, what I'll be doing is taking the glass off. The kale hasn't shown yet, but there seems to be a few little signs of something coming up, so no doubt we'll see them this week. So, thank you for watching another episode of Jim's Allotment Garden. Obviously, if you do have any comments, questions or anything like that, always put them below and I'll always get back to you. And thank you to all the people who have commented on the previous videos and subscribed. And I'll see you on the next episode of Jim's Allotment Garden.